welcome to our Being Your Own CEO Success Circle. This is a support especially for solopreneurs. And this morning we are going to talk about limiting beliefs. So we will get underway right away by my introducing everybody who is here. And let's see, David, you're first on the list. So David Flannery is here. He's in Illinois, and he creates affordable websites for small businesses.
And we are going through all the way to your website.
Right on. Thank you for that. Thank you for checking. And we have Fred Jones, who is sort of from BC. He facilitates leadership and community building for youth. And welcome back, Fred. And you've been in Australia for a while. And let's see, who else is here? Then we have Nathan, who is in Bucerius, is it?
No, not this time around. I'm in a place called, well, my girlfriend says, tell everybody you're in Guadalajara. That's not actually true. I'm in an area called Tlajumulco de Zúñiga.
Oh, okay.
Which is south of Guadalajara.
Oh. So, as you might guess, folks, Nathan is in Mexico, and he guides writers through the creation of a book. Let's see, who else is here? Vivek Rayo. He's in the UK, and he simplifies life and business by unifying different technologies and developing software. So, and I will introduce myself. I'm Lowell Ann, and I'm in BC, and I like to coach retirees who want to create an online business. So, David, I see you waving.
Yes, we also have Javita in chat.
Right on, Javita. Welcome here. Feel free to come inside if you would like to. You're always welcome. So we last week we were sort of chatting about what February's agenda would look like, and Nathan volunteered to give us a bit of a presentation on using NLP to get rid of limiting beliefs. And I guess we all have a limiting belief or two. I think that's a sort of a common thing for all of us. It just depends on how much impact that limiting belief has on one's life, I guess. Would you agree with that, Nathan?
Yes, of course. There are other aspects to it, like self-sabotage, which is also a big problem. And from what I've seen, my direct experience with it is that it comes about quite often as a result of a trauma, that the self-sabotage wouldn't be present in an ordinary person, but it's usually activated by some sort of trauma, some sort of shock.
Oh.
And so the big challenge is being able to see it. And then once you see it, how do you deal with it so that you don't keep repeating the same things?
Yeah. But what I guess what I was trying to say is that we all know there's certain things that we are not very good at. And I think you could refer to that as a limiting belief.
There's that too,
it's not necessarily from a trauma.
Yeah, limiting beliefs can come about as a variety of sources. Like one of the biggest ones is I'm not good enough, or being told that you're not good enough, you're not enough. There are all sorts of limiting things that can come up, like anger can create a whole bunch of problems because it changes your energy and it can attract some really undesirable things into your life. So in terms of limiting beliefs, like neuro-linguistic programming, the full name, or NLP, it can help you in a variety of ways of dealing with that. So like the three that I'm going to talk about are timeline, belief change, and collapsing the anchors. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because we don't have a lot of time, and I want to give space for questions. So when you're dealing with limiting beliefs in NLP, the number one fastest, best way of dealing with it is something called timeline. And it was invented by a guy by the name of Tad James back in the 80s. In timeline, what it does is it takes you on a hypnotic journey back into your past. And the purpose of it is to find the root cause of a particular event. Now, in timeline, you might go through 2 or 3 of those in a session, but the idea is to find the root cause. It's quite often a trauma. It is quite often things like anger or fear or not able to make or keep money, things of that nature. And so the purpose is to find the root cause and see. What a lot of people don't understand is that they think, oh, well, I've got this trauma and I've got to get rid of it. No, you don't. What timeline does is it doesn't actually get rid of the event itself. What it does get rid of is the emotional link to that event. So it dissolves the emotional link and the event stays. But in my direct experience of using timeline on myself and having people do it, is that the original event will change. It will become different. It will become represented in your mind differently. So like, for example, when I had this one particular belief and I was led through timeline, not only did the emotional attachment, that link to the trauma dissolve, but the way that I represented the event in my mind completely changed. And it turned into a benign scene of, in this case, my father standing in his jewelry store with his hands on the showcase and just looking out into the room. And that's it. And it was completely benign, no problem.
Right.
So that's one approach. Another technique is called belief change. And belief change has to do with finding out how you represent things for yourself. The human beings are really smart. And we have all these different really cool ways of doing things, but we don't actually know how we know. And in belief change, one of the things that you discover is, how do you know something is true?
Right.
And equally, how do you know when something is false? So as an example, in my case, and there are 4 steps to it, and I'm just going to describe the 2 that I discovered. When I know something is true, I feel a white column of light coming straight up the front of my body and illuminating all the chakras. That's how I know it's true. Equally, when I know it's false, it was really bizarre. When my coach asked me this, I thought, wow, I didn't realize I thought like that. But when I know something's not true, and this is going to sound a bit gross, but apparently a lot of people do what I do, I have the sensation of it being in the lower spine, literally shitting it out. That's how I know it's not true. Wow. So with belief change, you can literally work with the structure. Like, it takes about 20 minutes to learn. But once you're taught how to do it, you can do belief change on yourself in about 2 or 3 minutes, literally that fast. So it's very effective, very helpful.
Something.
I think we lost Nathan.
I think we did.
He's frozen
Yes.
and no sound at all. So
Frozen in time.
Wow. I wonder if he can hear us. Well, so as we wait to see whether Nathan can correct that, I think that's a really interesting question. How do we know whether something is true or not? I think as I try to think through my own case, it does have, it seems to come about as a feeling in your body. I think of, that concept of a gut feeling. I remember when I was working as an employment counselor, somebody would come in with a request on something, and I quite often had a gut feeling about it. And for a long time, I didn't believe my gut feelings until I came to realize that, or that I observed that that gut feeling came true. So I began to trust my gut feeling. So, um, but so I mean that's an expression that we all use. We have a gut feeling about something. So there you
Nathan,
are, Nathan. You're in here twice now.
It wasn't intended. Oh, I'm in twice. Well, I don't know what to do about the other one.
Well, don't worry about
Um,
it.
no, I have a long-standing problem with my computer, and as soon as I'm able to, I need to upgrade it because I've got a hardware issue that causes these freezes. Anyway,
Right.
what I was talking about was the last technique. It's called, well, it's actually one of several things. In NLP, there's a technique called anchoring.
Mm-hmm.
And anchoring is something that human beings do all the time, but we're not necessarily conscious of it. And it can create some really major problems. And I'll first explain a neutral or positive anchor and a negative anchor, and then collapsing the anchors. So an example of a neutral or positive anchor is, let's say you're in a car. It's a convertible. It's red. The top is down. It's a nice, warm, sunny day. You're with your significant other in the right seat, and you're coming up to a beautiful bridge. It's one of those suspension bridges. The Port Mann Bridge would be a perfect example. You're coming up to that bridge. It looks absolutely lovely. And as you're driving across the bridge, on the radio comes a song by Steely Dan called Deacon Blues. Okay? So sometime later, maybe a week, a couple of months, whatever it is, you hear the music of Steely Dan, you hear Deacon Blues, and what's going to happen? You're going to go back in time.
You're going to see that.
Yeah, you're going to relive it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
an example of a positive or neutral anchor. Now, an example of a negative anchor is, let's say you're sitting across from a good friend, and that person has lost their husband or their boyfriend, or their son or daughter has died, and that person is sitting in front of you and they're crying very deeply, they're sobbing, and you, in a moment of wanting to comfort your friend, you reach across and you touch them on the knee. You just created an anchor. Now, if down the road a piece, somebody were to touch them in the same way, they're going to feel really bad, and they're probably not going to know why. And this is an example of a negative anchor. And this kind of stuff happens with people all the time. So somebody's crying and somebody like embraces that person in a hug and blah, blah, blah. That's also that kind of anchoring. So an example of like an extreme situation is if you've got a trauma. Somebody, as a result of a severe trauma, linked a negative event to a part of their lives that was before was neutral or benign. And then all of a sudden, whenever they're triggered to think about that event or somebody talks about it, it triggers this huge reaction, which is really quite terrible. So collapsing the anchors is a technique where you create a series of positive anchors in the person's life. So an example that I did for myself a while ago is I wanted to collapse a really negative anchor in my life. So I did this with my hand. You see my two fingers. And so what I would do, or what I did, is I thought of 5 really positive things in my life. And I had them in my mind very firmly, along with the emotions, the feeling, any sound, any smell. And then I would take these 2 fingers and I would press them on the top of my leg, just behind the kneecap, while I was sitting. So I did 5 of those with different memories, and that's called stacking the anchors, okay? The reason I did that is that I was going to go to the next stage, which is collapsing the anchors, and I wanted to make sure it was extremely powerful so that when it collapsed, it would go boom and vanish from my life. The next thing is I created another anchor using these 2 fingers of this hand, and then I thought about the really negative experience, the really horrible memory, and I anchored it again in the same way on my right leg. And then when it came time to collapse them, I just, shook the energy off, sat down, and took both hands like this, and press them to the appropriate places on my legs. And I have to tell you, the shock of what happened nearly threw me out of my chair. And it was a really profound reaction of letting all of this go. But when it let go, that was it. The memory just vanished. The trauma vanished, literally in seconds. So that's an example of collapsing anchors. So all three of these techniques are very powerful. If I was to work with somebody who's got some sort of trauma or limiting belief, the number one technique I would use is timeline, and see what happens with that first. A fourth thing that you might want to employ, depending on what's going on, like abandonment issues for one thing, it could trigger a phobia, and in which case I might try the fast phobia cure. All of these techniques are really, really fast. You can literally do them in minutes. Timeline is probably the longest. It might take half an hour.
But less dramatic.
Well, it depends. Timeline can be pretty dramatic too. It just really depends on the person and their makeup. Everybody's different. But one thing I can tell you is that when these things happen, it's going to change your personality. You will change. You'll feel something for sure. And you might not feel a lot necessarily right away, but you will feel it in the days to come. So anyway, that's it.
So, and I find that timeline, I make a connection there because I do some exercises with people who are trying to find their passion. And we do the same thing. We go back to different phases of their life. And examine things that were going on at different phases. So, yeah.
Another aspect in NLP is finding your why.
Yes.
And there's, which I think is what you, okay, so that's what you mean. And there are ways of doing that too. Like my coach that I was working with a few years ago led me through an exercise to find, it wasn't so much my passion, it was to find the why. But for me, what it was is community, which is really important to me. And courtesy of something that happened last night, I'm going to have the opportunity to do some of that. And another thing which came up a few days ago, I did something kind of risky perhaps, but I wrote to one of the founders of Blab. And I wrote to him and I said, what would it take to bring Blab back? And he said, $2 million and a really great engineering team.
Wow.
I'm not joking. That's what he said to me. I was amazed he even responded to me.
Wow.
Because I was one of the people who was really critical of the way that he treated the whole thing. But he responded to me, and I was actually thinking of posting it on Facebook and said, so, who wants Blab back?
Right.
Well, I'm actually going to post it maybe later today just to see what happens. See what kind of reaction I get. It's probably going to be, okay, do we burn them at the stake or not?
So, Nathan, how did you learn these NLP techniques?
Ironically, I first encountered NLP in the early 80s when I was recovering from, I was in a halfway house, recovering from an experience of being in a cult group, of all things. And NLP was just in its early stages, and the people who ran the halfway house were practicing NLP, and we were also watching presentations by Richard Bandler and John Grinter, who founded the whole thing way back then. That's when I first learned about it, but I flirted with it on and off for years. And then recently I realized that NLP would help me solve a whole bunch of major problems, which it has, more so than anything else I've done. And the other thing that happened is about 4 years ago, when I was in a really bad place in my life, I remember sitting in my little camp chair in my apartment, and I metaphorically got up and drew a line on the floor and promised myself, so long as I'm of sound mind and sound body, I'm never going to let this happen again. And that's when I thought about YouTube, and I thought about NLP, and I did a search on YouTube for prosperity, abundance, and NLP. And I found a video by a guy by the name of Rick Schnabel, which was called From Self-Sabotage to Self-Made Millionaire. And I watched it. And then I signed up for the offer of coaching. That's when I met a guy by the name of Hamish. And we became friends. We did a whole bunch of stuff to do with NLP for a couple of years. And then Hamish kind of vanished from the scene in my life. But Rick Schnabel, who I became fairly friendly with, he decided to retire as a trainer about, 6 months ago. And he was offering a contest, and I won one of the packages, which is NLP level 2.
Oh.
And I proceeded to do a lot of self-study and educate myself, and I've learned a whole ton of techniques courtesy of doing that.
Right.
So that's hopefully not too long-winded of an answer.
Right. So I was just trying to I've been aware of NLP for quite some time. I'm just trying to remember how I encountered it. But I remember Nadine Hancher. She was a guest on this
She was.
Success Circle. She came and talked about it, and I know that she has used it in her counseling work for a long time. So yeah,
it's true.
So but what I sort of remember about NLP is that there's it's connected to body language as well.
Absolutely, yes.
So that when and I think it's used by certain agencies to determine the truth of something or whatever by observing body language.
You can do that to a point, but a better way of doing that, in my opinion, I know a guy by the name of Alan Stevens out of Australia. And Alan Stevens is a facial reading expert. He has a course on that. NLP will help you to a degree, perhaps, with some of that. But in my opinion, what Alan has is better. It's far more targeted because it literally teaches you how to read people, which could really save your butt in some situations. I wish I was better at it than I am. I learned a few things about it, but not enough. But Alan's course, if I were to take the whole thing, would really help a lot. NLP does help you determine a little bit what a person might be thinking or feeling by noticing what their eyes are doing when you are in conversation with them. And you can also tell certain things by the body language too, like whether somebody is interested in you or not, or if they want to escape, or there are different forms of languages, different forms of the body language that will show you different things.
Well, and I mean, what I find really interesting is that in my coaching world, there's a I mean, when I started out my coaching, we did it over the telephone only.
Yeah.
And I can remember people saying, "Oh, well, that will never work because you can't see the person's body language."
True, but it will work.
However, one of the things that I discovered, and I'm not the only coach that has discovered it, is that sometimes you listen better when you don't have the visuals.
And
if you're coaching, you need to be really listening. So
and there is an aspect of NLP which is conversational hypnosis. And you can do a tremendous amount just by talking with somebody if you approach it the right way. I watched my colleague Rick Schnabel doing conversational hypnosis, and I've gotten more adept at seeing and hearing what's going on. But you could do it just in a phone call, no sweat. You could even do it by text.
Well, and like I say, I mean, one of the most important ways of connecting with people is that they get the sense that they are being heard. That is a really, really, really important aspect in relationships. And so certainly from a coaching perspective, the other person needs to really feel as though they're being heard, partially by the question, the way you as a coach respond, or the questions that you pose or whatever. But I suppose in a kind of a way we're talking about another aspect of NLP.
Yes, for sure. There's like NLP also uses hypnosis, definitely. That's a big part of it. There are different inductions that one can do, and some of NLP, like in terms of the people who, like what happened is Bandler and Grinder modeled a whole bunch of very successful therapists. Virginia Satir was one, Milton Erickson was another. There was one really cool story I read about Richard Bandler, who went into a psychiatric facility with some sort of guy who was supposedly catatonic. So Bandler was a really interesting dude. He is, he's still alive. They both are. And he did this one really cool thing. He built rapport with the catatonic guy by breathing, since he couldn't make contact any other way. And so he just sat on the couch with the guy and just started breathing with him. And after about 20 minutes, he started varying his breathing rate a little bit just to see what would happen. And the guy followed him in the breathing patterns, and he realized he had rapport. And after a while, I forget how long, 20, 30 minutes of this, he suddenly turned to the guy and yelled, "Hey, you got a cigarette?" And the catatonic guy jumped off the couch and yelled, "Don, don't do that."
Wow.
Yeah.
So matching breath. Isn't that interesting?
So what Bandler did was a couple of things. There's something called a pattern interrupt, breaking rapport, and then all of a sudden this guy having an extreme reaction because of the breaking of rapport. And breaking rapport can be really useful, because if you're with somebody you don't like and you don't want to be with that person, how would you end the conversation? So an example is, I was in a Starbucks, Cook Street Village, and I wound up talking to this woman. And after a while, I realized I really didn't like her and I didn't want to continue the conversation. I was thinking, how do I get out of this? And then it hit me, two things: pattern interrupt and breaking rapport. I jumped up, said, "Excuse me, gotta use the loo. See you in a few minutes." Or I didn't even say that. I said, "Just gotta use the loo." And I took off to the washroom. When I came back, she was gone. So the perfect example: pattern interrupt, breaking rapport, and that was a simple way of doing it.
Interesting.
Yeah, it can be really cool. I mean, I love NLP, what you can do with it, and how much it can help you if you use it.
So I'm just wondering, I see that Javita says out there, that's really interesting, Nathan.
What's up, Dylan? Yeah, but I can't do it until after I
David,
get
can you
going.
turn on, can you mute? David?
It has to be before 2.
Can we mute him? I don't know if we can.
Before
Maybe
2
I
o'clock
can.
today, or it's going to be this evening.
I can't, wait now, here,
I think you can see.
yes.
Because I've got a
mute.
meeting.
There we go. Cool.
So I'm just wondering whether any other panel members have any questions or comments for Nathan. We are pretty close to the end of the hour, or half hour. So David has...
Question I have is, if we want to make use of NLP, what's the first step that we need to do?
First step would be to sign up for a program that's available, either a home study program or a live program, and start going through the materials. Like, for example, there are a couple of things that are going on. Haven't mentioned those yet, but I have started to create a partnership with Rick in Australia, and I'm going to be helping him marketing his program. So one level of what he does is called Rich Mind. It's a 90-day program. It has some NLP in it, but if you wanted to learn it, I would say start with the basics, which is NLP level 1, either in a home study or a live setting. And there are all sorts of videos that will teach you exactly how to do it. And you can practice these things on yourself. You can practice with other people. You can join some of the groups that I'm a part of. and interact with the people in the groups and say, well, how would you do X? And they'll tell you. And so there's a really good community. There's lots of really good feedback. A lot of the people in the communities are active practitioners of NLP. They've been certified. They can help you a lot. So there are a lot of options, but that's what I would recommend.
It never occurred to me to go to YouTube and look for something on NLP.
You can find plenty of stuff. You can find plenty of stuff on YouTube. Like, I really enjoy watching some of Richard Bandler's videos. He's a really interesting dude. But there are other people on there. Rick Schnabel, you can find his stuff, some of it at least. And you can find videos by John Grinder, the other founder of NLP. There are other really notable people out there. One of them is Robert Dilts, I believe, is his name, who did some really major stuff. And there was a video I watched a while ago to do with the late Milton Erickson, where he was talking how he cured a woman's depression in about 5 minutes. Actually, it might have taken him 15 minutes. But when he did what he did with this woman, and it was just an amazing story, and it had to do with a lot of the powers of observation, and then writing a precise prescription for this woman. And when he did it, and she listened and actually implemented it, she wasn't depressed for a day in her life. After that, she became one of the most popular people in her community and became very much loved by the people around her. She was lonely. She had no friends. She had all this stuff. And Erickson came into her life and walked through her house and asked a few questions, wrote this incredible prescription for her, and she never had any problems for the rest of her life. And this was like, I think it was like 15 years more that this went on, that she lived.
Wow.
And no more problems. And when she died, I mean, a lot of love from the community for her.
Oh,
Just a really,
interesting.
yeah, really profound. Like, Erickson was an amazing dude with what he was able to do.
What's his first name again?
Milton Erickson.
Okay.
And there are some videos out there of him. I don't know how many. I've only seen one,
Okay.
but it was enough.
Right. And you said Rich somebody. What was his last name?
Richard Bandler, he's one of the founders, and John Bandler, Bandler.
BLER. Okay.
Yeah. Richard Bandler also teamed up with a guy out of the UK, Paul McKenna, who's considered a top hypnotherapist in the UK. And he wrote a book called Get the Life You Want. And it's full of inductions and all sorts of things that you can do to solve problems.
Okay.
Like the fast phobia cure, how to beat anxiety, really interesting stuff. It's kind of like a rabbit hole, this thing. You get into it and it kind of sucks you in a very positive way when you start to see what you can do to improve your own life,
To
not
take
mention
care
the
of
lives of others.
yourself. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you can do amazing stuff. Like for myself, I decided to do timeline on some long-standing anger issues, and I did 4 timelines on myself in one day.
Wow.
Well, but it made a huge difference. It brought up a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't even know that I was thinking about. And there was just this dramatic shift. And all these problems that I had and all these memories I had suddenly vanished from my life. I mean, I can't access them anymore. They're gone. And the interesting thing about a lot of these problems I had is, like, I'd been praying for years to find something that could remove the memories. EMDR works to a degree. Spiritual practice will work to a degree, but nothing works like NLP, in my opinion. Because when I did this, all of a sudden, all of these things, they just vanished. It's like, really? It's gone? And it was just so amazing. And it's just sitting here and going, wow. And I wrote about it in the group, like one of the NLP support groups for these courses. And my friends were just going, awesome. And I had a great interaction with Rick about this to do with his own stuff. And Rick has talked openly about his own journey. And which is wonderful when you get the founder of an organization like this talking about their own journey and being really open and honest with the community. It really builds a lot of rapport and trust.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay,
and we've gone over.
we have gone a little bit over. So just before we close, any closing comments or observations from the panel? If
I have put I have put a couple of links in the comments
Awesome.
on YouTube, which I found.
And I'll as I learn more, as I build this relationship more with Rick, I will start putting up some stuff, some links to some of what I'm involved with. I still need to do some more work to nail things down, but there are a couple of things that I'd like to share with the group when I have everything set up.
right on.
Yeah, cool.
Well, and thank you very much, Nathan, for
My pleasure.
sharing your experience as well as your knowledge of NLP, and you gave us a few names that if we have interest in following up, we can look those up as well. So thank you so much, and we are at the end of our 30 minutes or 35 minutes now. So I just want to close by reminding everyone that it's important to do what you love with passion. And we shall see you next week. So